It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Switzerland's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be looking at Switzerland's squad for the 2022 World Cup. This preamble is going to be the same for every mediacast we do for the Players series. So those familiar with it can jump ahead to around 3.5 to 4 minutes when we begin to talk about the team. The times for each section are near the top of the show notes, at the top of the show notes. And for YouTube watchers, those include a timestamp, little bars along the bottom, as well as in the show notes that you can click on to go directly to the point that you want. For those looking for a quick version of this, you can skip to near the end of the mediacast, the last 10 minutes or so, where we summarize the likely starters. And prior to that, with about 30 minutes remaining, we'll have some discussion on the squad, the main issues with the squad, their club affiliations of the players, some stats and an overview of new, injured and outgoing players. And we'll also be editing this mediacast into a shorter version for those who are just looking for an overview. For those looking for a deep dive, you've come to the right place. We go through the players and how likely each one is to make it to the final squad. And we explain why we think so and give information on each player's history and standing with the squad. And the way we do this is by organizing the players into their designated position. We always note that these are a bit artificial since players don't always play in their coded positions, but it's nevertheless a good way to organize the discussion. And then we go through the players and share some of the data we've collected in our soccerphiles. And using that data, we try to predict how likely the player is to make the team, based mostly on their recent participation, but a couple of other factors as well. We categorize them into definite, likely, possible but unlikely, and seemingly off the squad. We also mention big players who have recently retired and make note of any who are currently injured. And then we finish with a quick run through of the squad again and try to determine which players will be the starters. Okay, and for those following on YouTube, we run a very simple graphic where we list the names so you can actually see the players' names in print, as it were. And it's the same broadcast for the audio podcast. So for listeners, we're going to try to repeat the names a few times so as to help you become familiar with the players' names. And when they step onto the field, hopefully you'll have some familiarity with them and can even impress your friends, perhaps, by telling them a couple of details that you learned here. All right, well, that's as much as we can do to this point, but as the rosters are being published, we're going to do an update episode on the teams and players. For the players, that'll essentially be going over our predictions, updating them based on the games played between now and the Cup, and revealing which players were selected. So we're going to wait for the preliminary and final squad list to come out. So keep your eye out for that update podcast, probably in early to mid-November. Okay, now on with Switzerland, and we begin with takeaways from the previous podcast we've done. So actually in our very first series, we did a series previewing the 2020 Euro Cup, which was in 2021, and we covered Switzerland in that group. And we also did a podcast on the groups for this World Cup. So that's been published fairly recently with a long version and a short version there. So here are some of the things we talked about in those podcasts. So we recognize that Switzerland has been a bit fortunate in their groupings, both in qualifying and in the group stage of the Cup, and probably have gone a little bit farther in the Cups because of that. However, I would now say they've kind of lived up to that expectation. We gave them credit for consistency in taking advantage of those groupings, and but now they actually seem to have improved to the point where they really are kind of a second power group, a second power in the group stages of the World and Euro Cups. And kind of following on that, we noted that they are starting to challenge top teams. So prior to, I would say, about 2018, generally they were consistent against weaker teams, which got them 2 cups. But, they weren't really a match for the top teams, sometimes getting a draw off them, troubling France in particular, but generally losing to top teams in Europe and in the world when it came to the World Cup. So, for example, a team like Brazil. But they did tie Brazil in the group stage of the 2018 World Cup. And, that was kind of maybe the beginning of starting to trouble some of these top teams. They finished ahead of Italy in qualification for this cup, although they didn't actually beat them. They tied them twice, and their consistency earned them first place. We noted that they've often troubled France, but they did beat them in the quarterfinal of the 2020 Euro Cup, a very strong French team there, but Switzerland beat them on penalties. And most recently, they have beaten Portugal in the Nations League group that they're in. So starting to challenge top teams are Switzerland. The next ones we'll just mention because they're more player related rather than team ones, like our first 2 points. And we'll come back to them later. So we'll kind of tease them here. We found that Switzerland has maybe too many central players and not enough wide players, particularly in the midfield. And finally, we note that they're a very tight, cohesive squad. So we'll examine that once we've gone through the players, and you'll have a bit more context to consider that comment. Let's move on to talk about their formations in their recent games. So we'll go back to the 2021 Euro Cup. I often just say 2021 Euro Cup, even though its official title is 2020 Euro Cup, and it was played in 2021. In that 2021 Euro Cup, we see that they started with kind of an unusual lineup, actually, for the first 4 games, so all the way through the group stage. It was a 3-4-1-2, so they used a 3-man back line, 3 central defenders, and then 4 midfielders, so 2 wingers. That was generally the defenders pushing up, actually. Just 1 central midfielder and 2 forwards. Well, they did for the first 4 games, but then in the 5th game, we saw them go to what seems to be their preferred lineup, a 4-2-3-1. So 4 at the back, 2 central midfielders, 3 attacking midfielders, and 1 forward. And in fact, they used that pretty much all the way through the World Cup qualification. That was 7 games. They did mix that up a bit in games 1 and 2. That was against Italy at home and Northern Ireland away, going with, instead of the 4-2-3-1, the 4-3-2-1. So a bit more of a defensive formation there. And that was for the first 2 games. And after that, for games 3 to 7, so 5 games in a row, they went back to that preferred 4-2-3-1. And actually continued with that formation into the friendlies, the 2 friendlies that they played after World Cup qualification. And finally, in Nations League, they kind of blew all that up using that 4-2-3-1 formation only in game 2, which was against Portugal. But they used tried out a 4-4-2 formation in game 1 against Czech Republic, and a 4-3-3 formation in games 3 and 4 against Spain and Portugal, respectively. So I'm not sure what that means, but overall they have preferred that 4-2-3-1 formation. And when we talk about the teams, you can generally think about that. 4 defenders at the back, regardless, after their experiment with the 3-man defense in the Euro Cup, and generally 1 attacker up front, although they tried to be, I guess, more attacking in those Nations League games. Excuse me. Okay, let's get on with the squad. So we're going to begin by talking about managers and a bit of history. We'll go back to the previous manager, and that was Vladimir Petkovic, So Vladimir Petkovic managed Switzerland from 2014 to 2021, taking them through 3 tournaments. So the Euro 2016, the World Cup 2018, and the Euro 2020. So fairly successful there. They dropped out at the round of 16. So they passed the group stage every time, dropped out at the round of 16 in the first 2, and beat France in the round of 16 to reach the quarterfinal in the Euro 2020 Cup. So quite successful. Nevertheless, replaced by Murat Yakin in 2021. And so he is the manager that will take them through this cup. So Murat Yakin was a manager of several teams in Switzerland prior to this, and also managed Spartak Moscow in Russia from 2014 to 15. Otherwise, all of his teams were in Switzerland there. And he himself was a player from 1994 to 2004. He earned 49 caps and 4 goals, and was part of the Euro 2004 squad, where he started and finished all games. So Murat Yakin, the manager who will guide them through this tournament. Let's talk about goalkeepers, and we'll begin just by listing the candidates, and we'll end by kind of summarizing the position. So we have 2 definite candidates. One is Jan Sommer, and the other is Jonas Omlin. And we also have a likely candidate in Gregor Kobel. And 2 possible candidates. One is Yvonne Mbogo as a possible, and Philip Cohn as a possible also. And finally, we have David von Balmus as a possible but unlikely. So let's go back to the top and talk about Jan Sommer. So he started 8 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 2, but out with coronavirus for 1 and not selected for 2 matches. So Jan Sommer has been with Switzerland since 2012 and has 76 caps. He's 34 years old and plays for Borussia Mönchengladbach in Germany. Has been with them for a long time, since 2004, and otherwise played in Switzerland. Was loaned for a while to Vaduz in Liechtenstein, but I believe they play in the Swiss league anyway. His first tournament, Jan Sommer, was the 2014 World Cup, and he was on the roster there but saw no action. The starting keeper was Diego Benaglio. But he became the starting keeper for the 2016 Euro Cup, and has been the starter ever since. In the 2018 World Cup, he was particularly good, making a lot of excellent saves during that tournament. And in the 2020 Euro Cup, he saved the 10th and final penalty against France, Kylian Mbappe taking that penalty. And they were also in a shootout in the quarterfinal there, and he saved a penalty in that one too. That was against Spain, and he saved a penalty taken by Rodri. Anyway, Jan Sommer, a definite candidate to make the squad, and I'll give it all away here by saying he's probably their starter too. Jonas Omlin had started 2 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 7, injured for the first 2 and not selected for 2. So regular call up there. He's been with the squad just since 2020, despite being 28 years old, and only has 4 caps, Jonas Omlin, and he plays for Montpellier in France, and prior to that played for Basel and Luzern in Switzerland. He was on the squad for the 2020 Euro Cup. That was his first tournament, but he was just on the bench there, didn't see any actions, and actually got injured in training, and was not on the bench, I believe, after that. Okay, Next we have, actually, yes, he went home, Jonas Omlin, during that tournament and was replaced by Gregor Kobel, who we meet next. So Gregor Kobel we have as a likely candidate. He started 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 5 others, injured for 1 and not selected for 3. So, yes, he is actually injured, but we're going to cover that at the end. He's out with a torn muscle fiber, so we'll tell you at the end if he's due to come back. Anyway, Gregor Kobel has been with Switzerland since 2021, so quite new to the squad, and he's 25 years old and has just 3 caps there. He's playing for Borussia Dortmund in Germany and has been with several teams in Germany, Stuttgart and Hoffenheim, and his youth club was Grasshopper in Switzerland. So he grew up in Switzerland but moved to Germany right from the beginning of his career. He was in the Euro 2020, as I said, not actually selected initially. Excuse me. He was on the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. But when Omlin was injured after game 1, he came in and was on the squad, but didn't see any action there. And that was his only tournament. Not the case for Yvonne Mvogo. He is, though, here just a possible candidate. He started none of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was on the bench for 6, though he was not selected for 7 matches, including the last 4. So seems to have drifted off the team, perhaps Kobel taking over his spot. Mvogo has been with Switzerland since 2018, and he has 4 caps and is 28 years old. So there is a chance of him coming back into the picture. Mvogo plays for Lorient in France, and prior to that was with Leipzig in Germany, where he was loaned out to PSV Eindhoven in the Netherlands. As I said, he was on squads prior to Kobel, so he was on the squad for the 2018 World Cup. Again, not getting any starts behind Jan Sommer there, and also on the squad for Euro 2020. So he was the other backup keeper there. Also didn't see any action. So Yvonne Mvogo has a chance of getting in, but Kobel seems to be ahead of him. We also have a possible candidate in Philip Cohn. Philip Cohn got his first appearance on the bench in November 2021 and didn't start any of their remaining 8 games, but he was on the bench for 2 of them and might have been for more, except he was injured for the last 6 matches. So he's just 24 years old. He doesn't have any caps for Switzerland yet, but he is playing for Red Bull Salzburg in Austria, so he'll be in the Champions League this year. And Red Bull Salzburg, and was actually loaned out to a smaller club in Switzerland, Will, in 2020-21. But I believe he's the starting keeper for Red Bull Salzburg. Finally, we have David van Bolmoes, who is a possible but unlikely here. He returned after an 11-month absence in October 2021 and didn't start any of their remaining 10 games, but was on the bench for 4. But he was injured for 2, and like Mvogo, not selected for any of the last 4 matches. So it's never good when coming up to a tournament, you're suddenly not being selected anymore. So Van Bolmoes plays for Young Boys in Switzerland and hasn't been a part of any tournaments. I don't know if I mentioned 28 years old, but that is his age. All right, so we'll finish the section by kind of summarizing what's been going on in the position. So basically, it's been Jan Sommer. He played all the games through the Euro Cup and the World Cup qualifiers. But when it came to the friendlies, they gave some time to the backup keepers. So Omlin and Kobel both started 1. And the same was true in the Nations League. Omlin and Kobel each got a start. and Jan Sommer got the other 2. So it looks like Jan Sommer is pretty unshiftable as the starting keeper, and my guess is they were just giving a bit of experience and field time to the backup keepers there rather than considering them as a replacement. Okay, we move on to defenders, and we will start with their many central defenders. So we'll go through the names first. We have Emmanuel Akanji as a definite candidate, and also Ire Comert as a definite candidate. But I should say right from the get-go that he's a definite candidate because he's always called up, but he actually doesn't get that many starts. In fact, the players who are likely candidates get more starts, and they are Nico Elvedi and Fabian Schär. So those 2 likely candidates. We also have Leonidas Sturgiu as a possible candidate, and 2 players who seem to be off the team, Besir Omaragic, seems to be off the team, and Cedric Zasiger. Okay, let's go back to the, oh my goodness, I've been putting them in the wrong section here. So just taking a moment to fix that up here. Okay, we're talking about central defenders. So let's go to Manuel Akanji as the definite candidate. He started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was on the bench for 1, injured for 1, suspended for 1, and not selected for 3 others. So I wonder if I've maybe misclassified him, because that's really the description of a likely candidate, but perhaps I bumped him up because of his club affiliation, playing for Manchester City. Recently moved to Manchester City in 2022 and was with Borussia Dortmund in Germany before that. So 2 top clubs there. He moved to Borussia Dortmund in 2018 from Basel in Switzerland and played for Swiss clubs throughout his youth and early career. So Manuel Akanji has been with the team since 2017 and has 42 caps and 1 goal. He's 27 years old. And his first tournament was the 2018 World Cup. So there, Manuel Akanji was a starter, started and finished all the games there. And in the 2020 Euro Cup, he was also a starter, starting and finishing all games there, playing as one of the 3 defenders in the 3-man backline that we saw they used through most of that tournament. So Manuel Akanji, a definite candidate. So is Ire Comert, despite not really being a starter. Ire Comert started only 3 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. However, he was on the bench for 8 others and injured for 2 games. So it seems like he's always called up, even though he's only rarely selected as a starter. Ire Comert has been with Switzerland since 2019 and has 9 caps. He's just 24 years old and plays for Valencia in Spain since 2022. So that's a recent move from Basel in Switzerland, and he too has played all of his career in Switzerland prior to that move to Spain. In terms of tournaments, he was selected. I'm not sure if I gave his caps. In 2019, he's been on the squad with 9 caps. I think I did say that. Anyway, his first tournament was the Euro 2020 there, but he didn't see any action in that cup. In fact, he wasn't even on the bench for one of the games. And I'll explain that just because it may run through the whole podcast. I can't remember exactly the number. I think they were allowed to bring 26 players. For some of the tournaments last summer, it was even 28, but they were still only allowed to put 23 on the bench. And so they had to leave a couple of players every time, kind of off the squad. So anyway, we move on to the likely candidates, Nico Elvedi. So Nico Elvedi started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was on the bench for 3, injured for 2. Wow, a lot of these players have gone through injuries. Injured for 2 and not selected for 2 others. So that makes him likely in our books. Nico Elvedi has been with Switzerland since 2016 and has 40 caps and 1 goal. And he's 26 years old, playing for Borussia Mönchengladbach in Germany for a long time, since 2015. And like so many we've talked about, with Swiss clubs before that. So FC Zurich in his case. His first tournament was in 2016, where he was on the roster but saw no action in that Euro Cup. And same is true for the 2018 World Cup, on the roster but saw no action. However, for the Euro 2022, he did start and finish all 5 games, playing as part of that 3-man defence. So Nico Elvedi working his way into the team and a likely candidate here. And also likely, we have Fabian Schär, actually the most veteran among the players we've talked about. We consider him likely because he started 5 of their 13 games since the Euro Cup in 2021. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 3, injured for 2 and suspended for 1 other. So actually an argument for him to be a definite candidate, and being the veteran he is, probably is. But just 5 of 13 starts there had us considering him likely rather than definite. Fabian Schär has been with Switzerland since 2013 and has 72 caps and 8 goals. He's 31 years old and plays for Newcastle in England. He's been around a bit, actually. Fabian Schär, he also played for Deportivo La Coruña in Spain and Hoffenheim in Germany before moving from Basel in Switzerland. So Fabian Schär was part of the squad for the 2014 World Cup. He didn't appear in games 1 and 2 there, but gained a starting position. Gained a starting position for games 3 and 4. And actually, they allowed 7 goals, Switzerland, in that 2014 World Cup, but only 1 of them was scored under his watch. So it looks like he bolstered the defense quite a bit there. He was a starter in the 2016 Euro Cup, where he actually scored 1 of their goals. The only goal of a 1-0 win over Albania there. And for the 2018 World Cup, he was a starter, but he was suspended for game 4 of that tournament. That was their win over France. A starter also in the Euro 2020. However, he lost his starting position in that tournament and just subbed into a couple of games after that. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we review the position. He also missed a penalty in the Game 5 losing shootout against Spain, the goalkeeper saving that shot. So Fabian Schär, a likely candidate to reach the cup. And we'll move on to Leonidas Sturgiu. So Leonidas Sturgiu got his first and only appearance as a substitute in June 2022. So always a bit difficult to know what to make of these players who come in right at the end, but we'll maybe check up on him in the update podcast to see if he's continued playing for Switzerland. So just 1 cap in 2022, and he is just 20 years old and plays for St. Gallen in Switzerland. So yeah, kind of in a vague possible category there. Besir Omaragic last appeared for the national team in June 2021, and yes, in June 2021. So he was part of the Euro Cup squad, but I'm getting ahead of myself there. So he has just 4 caps for the squad. He was on the team first in 2020 and then gone in 2021. But he's only 20 years old, Omaragic, so we might see him in the future. He plays for FC Zurich in Switzerland. And despite his short spell with Switzerland. He was chosen for the 2020 Euro Cup. He was on the roster, but not on the bench for any of the 5 games. So I'm not sure what that means. But as I mentioned earlier, they didn't necessarily, or they weren't able to bring all their players to the bench. They had to make a selection. Finally, we have Cedric Zesiger, and he's also seems to be off the team. He got his first cap in September 2021 and started one of their remaining 13 games and was on the bench for 2 others, but disappeared after that and was not selected for the last 10 matches. So he is a 24-year-old who plays for Young Boys in Switzerland, just that 1 cap for him, so no tournaments. All right, let's review the position. And as we noted, it was a 3-man back line, a 3-man central defense in the Euro Cup. Akanji and Elvedi played all of the games in the Cup, and Schär was in the center for the first 2 games, but then Schär disappeared, and left back Ricardo Rodriguez was the left side of that 3-man defense for the next 2 games. And then in game 5, they went back to a 4-man back line, so just 2 central defenders. And it was Akanji and Elvedi. And they continued for the first 3 games of World Cup qualifying. And then Schär kind of came back into the picture. So it was a rotation of players, Akanji, Elvedi, and Schär. And oddly, the central midfielder Frey kind of came into the rotation after that in the last game of World Cup qualifying, and then in one of the friendlies too. Comert also showed up in one of the friendlies, and in the Nations League games in June, it was a rotation of all 5 of those players, Akanji, Elvedi, Schär, Frey, and Comert, none of them playing more than 2 of the 4 games there. Okay, so that leaves us with kind of a rotating group of central defenders, and let us move on to left backs here. Left. Oh, my fingers are not working. I'm just correcting the. I'm usually a good typer. I'm an English teacher, for God's sakes, but I'm having a bit of trouble with my fingers here. Okay, left backs. Okay, well, for candidates, we have Ricardo Rodriguez. He's a definite candidate. And we also have Ulysses Garcia coming back into the team, and Loris Benito seemingly off the squad. So 3 candidates here for left back. And let's look at Ricardo Rodriguez. So he's a real veteran with the squad. We have him as a definite because he started 11 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, subbed in for 2 and subbed in for 1 and injured for 1. So always called up Ricardo Rodriguez. He has recently hit 100 caps. So 100 caps and 9 goals since 2011 for Ricardo Rodriguez, and he's 30 years old. He currently plays for Torino in Italy since 2020, having moved from AC Milan in Italy there, and also played for Wolfsburg in Germany before moving from FC Zurich in 2012. His first tournament was the 2014 World Cup, and he was kind of a starter right from the beginning there. So he started every tournament, 2014 and 2018 World Cups, and 2016 and 2020 Euro Cups there. He's actually missed a couple of penalties in his career, so he's a penalty taker, but he missed a penalty against San Marino during 2016 qualifying, and missed a penalty against France. That wasn't in the shootout. That was actually in the game, 55 minutes into the game against France, but they won it in the shootout. And he had also missed a penalty in qualifying during Euro 2020. So doesn't sound that trustworthy as a penalty taker, but they have allowed him to take penalties, so he must usually score them. Anyway, Ricardo Rodriguez, the steady left back for many years. Ulises Garcia returned after a more than 4-year absence in September 2021, and he didn't start any of their remaining games, but he was subbed in for 4 and on the bench for 3. However, he was not selected for any of the last 6 matches, so seemed to come and go there. Ulises Garcia plays for Young Boys in Switzerland and was with Werder Bremen in Germany before that. And he hasn't been a part of any tournament there. So kind of came in during qualifying there and now seems to be off the team again. Loris Benito also seems to be off the team. He last appeared for the national squad in the 2021 Euro Cup. So Loris Benito was with Switzerland from 2018 and has 13 caps and 1 goal. He's 30 years old. He plays for Young Boys in Switzerland. That's his second spell with them, moving to them quite recently. Was with Sion in Switzerland. But before that, with Bordeaux in France, and earlier in his career played for Benfica in Portugal. So Loris Benito, though, now seemingly off the squad. There is a chance of him coming back, especially since they don't really seem to have a backup left back here. So I'll finish with a summary of the position. They didn't actually use the position of left back in the Cup, in the Euro Cup. With that 3-man defense for most of the tournament. So Rodriguez, I think he spent 2 games playing as a left wing back, so more of a winger role there. And then throughout qualifying, it was Rodriguez playing as a left back, and actually right back Widmer came over once to fill the position. And Lotomba is also a right back. He filled the position once during the friendlies, but it was Rodriguez in all of the Nations League games. So a pretty steady fixture there at the back, though seemingly it's the right backs who are used when he's not available rather than the 2 left backs that we talked about here. And moving on to right backs, those names I just mentioned are the ones here. And we have Steven Widmer as a definite candidate, and Kevin Mbabu as a possible candidate, and Jordan Lotomba also as a possible candidate. Jordan Lotomba, though, despite being coded as a right back, we saw he started as a left back. That was in one of his 2 starts. And in the other, he was a left attacking midfielder. So he's played anything but right back. Nevertheless, he's coded that way. So we'll deal with him here. Steven Widmer started 9 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he subbed in for 2 and was on the bench for 1. So just 1 match that he wasn't selected for. And he's been with Switzerland, Steven Widmer, for since 2014, and has 33 caps and 2 goals. He's currently 29 years old. And Steven Widmer plays for Mainz in Germany. And he was with Basel before that, but prior to Basel, was with Udinese in Italy from 2013 to 18. He also played in Spain with Granada. And his first cap was in 2014, but he seemed to have trouble getting onto the squad, wasn't selected for the 2014 World Cup, but was selected for the dread standby squad, which means you're kind of in limbo, kind of selected and not selected. Turned out to be not selected in that case because he didn't play any games in the 2014 World Cup. In the 2016 Euro Cup, he was selected for the preliminary squad but didn't make the final cut. And the same was true for the World Cup. So poor Sylvain Widmer always coming close, but not making it until 2020 for the Euro 2020, where he did make the final squad. And actually, after being subbed into game 2, he got a starting position for the last 3 games there. So actually playing on the left side there, even though he's coded as a right midfielder in general. So Stephen Widmer, a definite candidate for this tournament. So his days of coming close but missing seem to be over. Kevin Mbabu started 4 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 3 and not selected for 5 others. So Kevin Mbabu has been with Switzerland since 2018 and a healthy 22 caps for the 27-year-old. He hasn't scored a goal. He's currently with Fulham in England since 2022, a recent move from Wolfsburg in Germany. And he did play for Young Boys in Switzerland before Wolfsburg, but was abroad prior to that with Newcastle in England and Rangers in Scotland, where he was loaned to. So been around a bit, Kevin Mbabu, in terms of European countries. His first tournament was the Euro 2020, where he was actually a starter in games 1 and 2, but then lost his starting position, as we saw, to Widmer. But he too lined up on the left side. I'm not sure if I'm accurate there. Anyway, it's something I'd have to check, but not really a big deal. Perhaps it was the right side because I'm mistaken. Neither he or Widmer were on the left side. They were both on the right side. Something's wrong with my sense of direction there. Okay, anyway, Kevin Mbabu got an assist in that tournament, by the way, with a good cross in the Euro 2020. So a possible candidate here. Also possible is Jordan Lotomba. He started 2 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 3, but there were 5 matches he wasn't selected for, just like Kevin Mbabu. So Jordan Lotomba has been with Switzerland since 2020. He has 7 caps and 1 goal and is 24 years old. He plays for Nice in France and was with clubs in Switzerland all of the time before that, after moving to France in 2020 from Young Boys in Switzerland. So Jordan Lotomba, a possible candidate. And we'll finish by summarizing the position. It's again, the position wasn't used in the cup until game 5, and I believe Widmer played on the right wing for all of those games, the first 4. Either Widmer or Mbabu. Mbabu for the first 2 and Widmer for the games 3 and 4, playing in a wing-back position, so a defender moving up to the wing, midfield wing. And in the World Cup qualification, it was Widmer for 4 games and Mbabu for 2 games. They also shared the friendlies, and for Nations League, it was 2 starts for Widmer and 1 start for Mbabu. There were times when there wasn't a right back position in those tournaments too. So it generally seems to be Widmer a little more than Mbabu, but an argument could be made that they're kind of sharing the position. Jordan Lotomba only has 2 starts, as I said, as a left back and a left attacking midfielder. So seems to be more of a bench player and not really in the rotation as a right back. Okay, well, that is the end of defenders, and we're going to move on to midfielders. So we usually combine defensive midfielders and central midfielders because their roles often overlap. And we'll begin with a veteran who's been off the team, but was a firm starter in this position for a long time. So we'll talk about him and talk about probably the hole that he's left. Valen Behrami. He's actually coded as a central midfielder and secondarily as a defensive midfielder. And we only have one actual candidate in as a defensive midfielder, and that is Denny Zakaria, who we have as a possible candidate. So we'll come back to him, but we'll just run through the central midfielders also. In the central midfield, we have Remo Freuler as a definite candidate, as well as Granit Xhaka. And we also have Jibril Sow as a definite candidate. And we even have a likely candidate in Fabian Fry, who we saw playing as a central defender a few times during this period. And finally, we have one possible but unlikely candidate in Castriot Imeri. All right, let's go back and start with Valon Behrami. So he's a veteran with the team. He was with Switzerland from 2005 to 18 and had 83 caps. By now, he's 37 years old and is retired from club soccer as well as international. He got his first tournament in 2016, but wasn't a starter there. But from the 2008 Euro Cup all the way to the 2018 World Cup, he was a starter. Let me correct that, actually. He wasn't in the 2010 World Cup either, but for 4 tournaments was a starter in the central midfield, but was off the team by the time the Euro 2020 came around. So perhaps they're used to him being gone. But let's wave a fond farewell to Valon Behrami, who has 83 caps for Switzerland. And we'll start to look at the players who replace him, beginning with possible defensive midfielder Denny Zakaria. And Denny Zakaria started 5 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. And he was subbed in for 1, suspended for 1, injured for 2, but then not selected for the last 4 matches. So again, never good coming up to a cup. So Denny Zakaria has been with Switzerland since 2016 and has 42 caps and 3 goals. He is 26 years old and he plays for Juventus in Italy. That's a recent move since 2022. He's actually currently on loan to Chelsea in England since 2022. I haven't seen him on the field yet, I don't think. Anyway, prior to Juventus and Chelsea there, he was with Borussia Mönchengladbach in Germany from 2017 to 22, and in Switzerland before that. His first tournament was the 2016 Euro Cup, but he didn't see any action in that tournament. It was actually a bit of a surprise that he had been chosen, since he had only played in 2 friendlies for Switzerland prior to that selection. For the 2018 World Cup, he was subbed into a couple of games, but not a starter. And also true for the Euro 2020, subbed into a couple of games, and he actually scored an own goal in that tournament. So it looks like Denny Zakaria has always had a bit of trouble making it onto the squad. He usually makes it to tournaments, but doesn't seem to see a lot of time in those tournaments. And rather, it's the central midfielders who are getting the starts here. So let's go to central midfielders and talk about the 3 definite candidates. Remo Freuler has started 10 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 2 and not selected for 1 other, so fairly consistently chosen to start. Remo Freuler has been with Switzerland since 2017, and he has 48 caps and 5 goals and is 30 years old. He plays for Nottingham Forest in England. That's a recent move in 2022, having been with Atalanta in Italy for 6 years before that. Moved over from Luzern in Switzerland in 2016 to Atalanta. For the 2018 World Cup, he was on the roster but saw no action. He had participated a lot in qualifying. He actually had played 7 of their 9 games in 2017 and 3 of their 4 friendlies in 2018. So a bit surprising that he didn't show up on the field. But he did in the Euro 2020, where he was actually a starter. He started all 5 games there, but he did receive a red card in game 5 against Spain. A kind of a harsh decision on a rough sliding tackle, which he jumped into. But he didn't go in studs up, and he got a lot of the ball. So we felt it was a pretty tough call against him. So Remo Freuler now seems to be well established in the squad as a starter even. Granit Xhaka, also a definite candidate, but he only started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was on the bench for 1 and not selected for 2 matches, actually, and injured for 4. So injury playing a bit of a role there. I have him as captain. He was captain of the team during Euro 2020. I'm not sure if he still is, but he could be. Granit Xhaka has been with Switzerland since 2011, and he has 106 caps and 12 goals, and is 30 years old. So he's been with Arsenal in England since 2016, and was with Borussia Mönchengladbach in Germany for 4 years before that, and kind of came through Basel's youth club, and that was his first club too. Actually, his brother plays for Albania, and anyone who knows Xhaka will know that he's an Albanian patriot. Sometimes gets in trouble for things like goal celebrations and stuff like that. But he has been with the team since the 2014 World Cup in terms of tournament. So despite being on the team since 2011, didn't make the 2012 Euro Cup, but he was a starter in the 2014 World Cup, and also in the 2016 Euro Cup, where he missed a penalty in their shootout against Poland in the round of 16 there. For the 2018 World Cup, he was a starter and got in trouble for a goal celebration against Serbia, later fined for that, and received, I think, a red card in their qualifying campaign there. For the Euro 2020, he was the captain and started and finished all 5 games there. He got 2 yellow cards in that tournament too, both of them for dissension, and I think he was suspended for the game 4 against France there. So it looks like they had 2 players suspended for that game, but still won it on penalties. Okay, Granit Xhaka, a definite candidate in central midfield. Sometimes he moves up more to a central attacking midfield role too. Djibril Sow is the final candidate who we have as a definite, and he started 7 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 1. So always selected Djibril Sow. He plays for, he's been with Switzerland since 2018 and has 32 caps and is 25 years old. So Djibril Sow plays for Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany, and was with Young Boys before that, but also played for Borussia Mönchengladbach in Germany, actually with their youth club as well, although he was with Zurich's youth club, and played for them in his early career. So it seemed to be a bit back and forth between the 2 clubs there. He didn't make it to the 2018 World Cup, Djibril Sow, but was selected for the Euro 2020, where he was subbed into 2 games there, and has worked his way more into the squad, getting more starts in the period that we're talking about. So those 3 central midfielders, we'll see how they kind of sort each other out there, because we also have Fabian Frey as a likely candidate, so a 4th central midfielder. He's actually coded as a defensive midfielder, so less of a surprise that he played as a central defender a few times. He did also play as a defensive midfielder, I think, in a formation where there was just one man in central defense, kind of a stopper role, Fabian Frey. So a very defensive-minded midfielder, nevertheless. He returned after a 3.5-year absence in September 2021 and started 5 of their remaining games, as well as subbing into 2 and being on the bench for 5. So returned immediately after the Euro Cup there and was called up for all but one game there, Fabian Frey. So he's been with the team since 2011 and has 22 caps and 3 goals. One of the senior members on the team at 33 years old now, and he's recently moved back to, not recently, he moved back to Basel in Switzerland for his second stint with them. That was in 2018. He had been with Mainz in Germany for 3 years in between his 2 stints with Basel, which was also his youth club. Fabian Frey actually had 62 games and 25 goals in his underage career. So for the underage 16 to 21, also played for the under 23 team. So played a lot of games for them and was part of the Olympics actually in 2012. That was the first time Switzerland reached the Olympics since 1924. Anyway, I usually don't get into the youth stuff, but he was not selected for the 2014 World Cup, rather on the dread standby squad. And in the 2016 Euro Cup, he appeared only in game 1, where he was subbed in. So trouble getting onto the squad. He also wasn't selected for the 2018 World Cup. As we saw, he was kind of absent from the team during that time, and also for the 2020 Euro Cup. So really just came back into the picture after the 2020 Euro Cup there in September 2021. So Fabian Frey has trouble kind of getting onto the team, but we do consider him likely to make this tournament, although probably not a starter. We have then just the possible but unlikely candidate, Castriot Emery, to talk about. And he got his first cap in November 2021 and didn't start any of their remaining 8 games there, but he was subbed in for 1 and on the bench for 1, and then he disappeared for the last 6 matches. So probably not for this cup, but he's only 22 years old. So a chance of him coming into the picture a bit down the road, and a slim chance of making this cup, especially since he has 4 candidates at likely or definite above him. Castriot Emery plays for Young Boys in Switzerland, and we might be seeing him in the future. Meanwhile, we've covered a lot of players in defensive midfielders and central midfielders, so let me tell you the situation there. Usually it's a two-man central midfielder. That could be just like the 4-2-1-3, where it's just 2, or it could be 4 midfielders with 2 in the center. Sometimes it's 1 central midfielder, as we saw when I was talking about Fabian Frey, and that it would be a 3-man midfield. I don't think they've used a stopper position like in a 4-1-4-1. But I think Frey has played that position when it's been one of them. Anyway, in the cup, it was Freuler and Xhaka, and Zakaria replaced Xhaka when he was suspended for the last game. Yes, it was Frey as the one-man central midfielder. That was in the first 2 games of World Cup qualifying, and then after that, it was Freuler and Zakaria as the central pairing. I believe Xhaka was on the field, but playing a bit further upfield when Freuler and Zakaria were the central pairing. And Jibril Sow replaced Zakaria once in that pairing. In the friendlies, it was a bit of a mix there, Freuler and Xhaka, and then Xhaka and Sow. And in Nations League, those two, as well as Xhaka, playing in a one-man central midfield for the last two. So it seems to be a bit of a mix-up right now. But anyway, we have the cast of candidates, basically Freuler, Xhaka, and Sau. And it almost seems like Sau kind of took over as the third option from Zakaria. Zakaria in there early in this period and Sau coming in more later. Well, I hope that wasn't too confusing. And I gotta say, I'm simplifying these as much as I can, because when I look at them game by game, it sometimes gets pretty complex. So I'm trying to write summaries that simplify it. Anyway, in terms of simplifying, we've divided the outside midfielders into basically three parts. One is the left and right defensive midfielders, which they rarely use. And then we're going to talk about left and right wingers. And then we're going to talk about left and right attacking midfielders. So kind of dividing up the midfield to help make more sense of it. But we can deal with the defensive midfielders fairly quickly here, because we only have one candidate actually. And also they rarely use the three-man midfield where we have right and left kind of defensive midfielders. So I'll start by just introducing the one candidate that we have, and that's Michel Aebischer, and we have him as a definite left defensive midfielder. And he's the only candidate there. And as a right defensive midfielder, we don't have any candidates. So you may wonder what's going on. And well, what's going on is now you see why we have so many central midfielders, because it's usually central midfielders that kind of push out to these positions. So I'll explain that a little more after I go through my Michel Aebischer here. So Michel Aebischer is a definite candidate, despite only starting 2 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. But he's always called up. He was subbed in for 5 games and on the bench for the 6 others. That's why we have him as a definite candidate. But here's a good example of why our categories, a definite category doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a starter. So Michel Aebischer has been with the Switzerland squad since 2019 and has 11 caps and is 25 years old. And he plays for Bologna in Italy. That's a recent move since 2022. And he was with the Young Boys in Switzerland before that, actually loaned to Bologna before actually signing with them. So Young Boys is his youth club and his first club. And in terms of tournaments, he did not make the 2020 Euro Cup, so he doesn't have any tournaments under his belt. And yet he's been selected regularly since that tournament. So that is the only candidate here. So let's talk about left and right defensive midfielders. So the position was only used once in the 3-man midfield. It's only used in the 3-man midfield. And that 3-man midfield formation has happened 4 times. So on the left side, it's been central midfielder Djibril Sow and defensive midfielder Zakaria. In the World Cup qualification games where they used that formation, and then Aebischer and Djibril Sow in Nations League. So generally played by a central midfielder, as we said, and Sow has done it twice. On the right, it's a bit more consistent. It's been Freuler twice, so he's too a central midfielder, and Aebischer popped up on that side too, so he played both right and left midfielder. Otherwise, it's been Freuler in 3 of the 4 times they've used that formation. Okay, let's move on now to wingers. I don't know why I put the whole bio on the graphic for for Michel Aebischer. I hope that didn't hurt your eyes, YouTube listeners. Okay, let's go to wingers. And for left wingers, we have Ruben Vargas as a likely candidate. And for right wingers, just like defensive midfielders, we don't have any players coded as a right midfielder. So again, we'll talk about Ruben Vargas and then talk about the position. So Ruben Vargas started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 2 and on the bench for 2. And injured actually for the last 3 matches. We don't need to deal with that injury though. It was a muscle injury and he was back playing with his club by late August. So Ruben Vargas back in action. Ruben Vargas has been with Switzerland since 2019 and has 26 caps and 4 goals, just 24 years old. He plays for Augsburg in Germany. Having moved there from Luzern in 2019. So Luzern was his first senior club, as well as his last youth club. So Ruben Vargas, his first tournament was the 2020 Euro Cup there. He was a substitute, but he subbed into 4 of the 5 games there, and he also scored a penalty in the winning shootout against France. However, he missed a penalty in the losing shootout against Spain in Game 5 there. He shot off target. And I'm finished. I have nothing more to say about Ruben Vargas, though. I'm stuttering over my words because I was kind of looking for something to add. But there is nothing. So let's summarize the position of left winger and right winger. So in the 3-man defense of the Cup, we had kind of left and right wingers. And it was on the left, Ricardo Rodriguez moving up to play 2 of the games. And then Zuber, who we're going to meet soon, an attacking midfielder, played the position, took over for the position there. Otherwise, the position was only used in a 4-4-2 formation, which they used once in the Nations League, and Vargas did play that position. We have no right wingers to talk about. So on the right side, it was always the right backs who came up to play on the wing. So in the 4 games of the Euro Cup, it was Widmer and Mbabu sharing that position. And in the One Nations League games, it was Jibril Sow, who seems to pop up all over the place, playing it there. So that's the winger position, not used much. You might want to keep that in mind for a later discussion, that they don't use that winger position much. Meanwhile, we'll move on to left attacking midfielders / left forward. We'll talk about that a little bit, but sometimes these attacking midfielders do play as a left forward in a 4-3-3. And we begin with just one candidate here, Steven Zuber, as a likely candidate. And Steven Zuber started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 4 besides, and injured for 2, so just 1 match he wasn't called up for. And he has been with the team since 2017, but has 51 caps and 10 goals. He is 31 years old, Steven Zuber, and currently plays for AEK Athens in Greece. That's a recent move, actually, in 2022 from Eintracht Frankfurt, although he was on loan to AEK Athens in 2021-22. And prior to Frankfurt, was with several clubs in Germany, Hoffenheim, and loaned to Stuttgart. He also played for CSKA Moscow in Russia. He moved there in 2013 from his Swiss team, which was Grasshoppers, his last youth club and first senior club. So Steven Zuber was actually around for a long time before he got his first cap. He was part of that 2012 Olympic team there as a under-23 player. He wasn't selected for the 2014 World Cup, although he may have been around at that time as a candidate. But it actually took until 2018 to get his first tournament, and there he started. He was a starter, except game 3 where he didn't appear. He was also on the 2020 Euro squad and wasn't a starter there. He actually subbed into game 2 and then gained a starting position for the remaining 3 games. There he made a tremendous assist against Turkey in the 2020 Euro Cup and had a good tournament in general, and is a likely candidate here on the upper left side of the pitch. And we'll move over to the right side where it's Stefan Renato. I'll just go through the candidates though. Stefan Renato as a definite, and Christian Faschnacht as a player who seemingly off the squad. So just 2 players to talk about here, beginning with Renato Stefan. What am I talking about? Renato Stefan started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was also subbed in for 5 and on the bench for 2, so always called up, which is why we have him as a definite candidate to make the squad. And he has been with the team since 2015 with 27 caps and 1 goal. And he is 31 years old, just like Steven Zuber. And similar in their tournament history, which we'll get to shortly here. We'll just go through his club history. So he's with Lugano in Switzerland, moving back there in 2022, but was with Wolfsburg in Germany from 2018 to 2022, and was with Basel and Young Boys in Switzerland prior to that. So Renato Stefan also had trouble getting into the squad. He was selected for the preliminary squad for the 2016 Euro Cup, but didn't make it, and also didn't make the 2018 World Cup or the 2020 Euro Cup. So hasn't been involved in a tournament, Stefan Renato, but is a definite candidate for this cup. Okay, and we also have Christian Faschnacht. So he started 1 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was subbed in for 4, but then he was not selected for the last 8 matches, so seems to have drifted off the team there. Christian Faschnacht has been with Switzerland since 2018, 15 caps and 4 goals in that time, and is 28 years old, so there is room for him to come back into the squad. He plays for Young Boys in Switzerland since 2017 and has been with clubs in Switzerland for his whole career. And he didn't make the 2018 World Cup, but did the 2020 Euro Cup, where he was a substitute, just subbed into 2 games there. And Christian Faschnacht, though, seemingly off the squad. So we'll check the update podcast to see if he made it back in the games leading up to the tournament here. So sorry, I didn't summarize the left side, so I'll go back to the left side and summarize that, and then on the right. So actually the left attacking midfielder and right attacking midfielder are quite common, as Switzerland prefer the 4-2-3-1 formation, so 3 attacking midfielders there. And on the right side, on the left side, it was Zuber in the last game of the World Cup qualifying, and in the last game of the Euro Cup and in much of the World Cup qualifying. But Vargas, the left winger we've just talked about, Ruben Vargas, shared the position increasingly, and now it seems like a rotation of Zuber and Vargas. And we noted earlier that the right back, Lotomba, who plays anywhere but right back, also started once in this position. On the right side, it's more consistently Renato Stefan, although the forward, Okafor, did replace him 2 times. But usually on the left side, usually for the attacking midfielders, Sorry, when it's a left forward or a right forward, it's usually a different player, not these attacking midfielders moving up to play as left and right forward. So we'll talk about that when we get to the players, the forward line. And speaking of forwards, we're moving on to that section of the podcast, and we include attacking midfielders in the forward line. And so for attacking midfielders, we have Xherdan Shaqiri as a likely candidate. Some may be surprised by that, but I'll tell you why soon. And we also have Mattia Botani as a possible candidate. And finally, Eddie Nielsen Fernandez as a player who is seemingly off the squad. So let's go back and take a look at Xherdan Shaqiri. Now, he's actually coded as a right midfielder, and he does tend towards the right side, but more often he plays as a central attacking midfielder. And he is the player when it's a right forward who is often in the position. Often there, because they don't always use a central attacking midfielder, though they do most of the time. Anyway, you'll find him up at the top of the field. Xherdan Shaqiri, he started 8 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for 3, but he wasn't selected for 3 matches also. So not a consistent starter, not as much as I would have thought, actually. He has been with Switzerland since 2010, and he's a real veteran with 108 caps and 26 goals, and is 31 years old now. And I wondered, actually, if his current club, Chicago Fire in the USA, might make him a less likely candidate, because sometimes when European players move to play in the United States, it's kind of seen as a retirement village. Anyway, he's been with Chicago Fire since 2022 and was with Lyon in France before that, and Liverpool in England from 2018 to 21. Stoke before that in England, and Bayern Munich from 2012 to 15. He moved from Basel in Switzerland in 2012 to Bayern Munich. And he was part of the 2010 World Cup, though he only appeared briefly in Game 3 there. But by the time the World Cup in 2014 came around, he was a starter. So I don't know what happened there with the 2012 Euro Cup, but he was on the Olympic team, so perhaps they're chosen for that instead. So a starter in the World Cup, he scored 3 of their 7 goals there. Actually, he scored a hat-trick against Honduras, all 3 of their goals in a 3-0 win over Honduras. And in the 2016 Euro Cup, he scored a late tying goal on a stunning bicycle kick from the top of the box against Poland. So he's been kind of looking good for them in tournaments, especially 2018 World Cup. He also got in trouble along with Xhaka for the eagle symbol in support of Albania celebration, but he was declared man of the match in their second game in 2018. And he was a starter in the 2020 Euro Cup, scored 3 of their goals in that tournament. So he's done very well in tournaments. However, he's just a likely candidate here, but I would be shocked if he wasn't actually brought in. Mattia Botani is our possible candidate as an attacking midfielder. He got his first cap in June 2022, and didn't start any of their 3 remaining games, but he was subbed in for one of them and on the bench for one of them. And unfortunately for him, he was injured for the last match. So 1 cap, his first in 2022 there, even though he's 30 years old. And he plays for Lugano in Switzerland since 2017. Finally, we have Eddie Nielsen Fernandez. So he last appeared for the Swiss in the 2021 Euro Cup, and he was with the team since 2016 and had 22 caps and 2 goals. He's actually only 26 years old, so a chance he might come back into the squad. He plays for Mainz in Germany since 2019 and was with West Ham in England before that, though I don't think he made much of an impression with them. In fact, he was loaned out in the last year to Fiorentina. He didn't make the squad for the World Cup in 2018. He did make the preliminary squad, but failed to make the final cut. And for Euro 2020, he was on the squad, but he didn't see any action there, actually not even on the bench for the first 3 games of that tournament. So Edmilson Fernandez never really made it into the squad despite his 22 caps. And let's summarize the attacking midfield position. So it has been Shaqiri actually throughout the whole period, except for the few times that the position was not used in World Cup qualifying. So Shaqiri, again, even when the position's not used, he sometimes either doesn't play or plays as a right forward. And for forwards, we have Breel Embolo as a definite candidate. And Haris Seferovic also he's just a likely candidate. And Mario Gavranovic as a likely candidate also. And Noah Okafor also as a likely. Possible candidates, we have Cedric Itten, Andy Zagiri, Zeki Amdouni, and then one possible but unlikely candidate in Dan Ndoye. So a few players to go through here. So we'll go back to the top with Breel Embolo, and he started 6 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup. He was subbed in for 2 and injured for 4. So just 1 game that he wasn't selected for. Yeah, that sounds a bit more like a likely candidate, but we have him as a definite. Breel Embolo has been with Switzerland since 2015 and has 58 caps and 11 goals. And he's 25 years old. He plays for Monaco in the French league and was with Borussia Mönchengladbach and Schalke in Germany from 2016 to 22. And he came from Basel in Brazil, which was his youth club and his first club. He did play for a couple of other youth clubs too, actually. He was born in Cameroon, but plays for Switzerland. And his first tournament was the 2016 Euro Cup, where he was subbed in to games 1 and 2, and then got a start for game 3 there. He was kind of introduced in that tournament as a rising star, but didn't really make an impression in that tournament. Didn't score any of the 3 goals there. He was also a sub in the 2018 World Cup. And for the 2020 Euro Cup, though, he was a starter. He started all 5 games and was injured. I think that was in game 5 there, and he scored 1 of their 8 goals in that tournament. And he actually kind of came on towards the end of the tournament there. I'm still trying to figure out which game. Yeah, it must have been game 5 that he was injured in. Breel Embolo, so a definite candidate for this cup, maybe somewhere between definite and likely, because likely candidate Haris Seferovic actually is more of a starter, I think, but we'll examine the position soon. Haris Seferovic started 5 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup and was subbed in for 2. But he was out with 2 separate injuries for 4 matches and not selected for 2 others. So Haris Seferovic has been with Switzerland since 2013 and has 88 caps and 25 goals. So pretty good return rate there, better than Breel and Embolo's. And Haris Seferovic is 30 years old. And he plays for Benfica in Portugal, has done so since 2017. However, recently he's been loaned to Galatasaray in Turkey. And prior to that, played for actually quite a few teams in Europe. Eintracht Frankfurt in Germany, Real Sociedad in Spain, and Fiorentina in Italy. So has been with quite a few clubs in his long career. And his first tournament was the 2014 World Cup, where he was not a starter, but did appear in all 4 games and scored a glorious injury time winning goal in game 1, which was a 2-1 win over Ecuador. For the 2016 Euro Cup, he was a starter, but he didn't score any of their goals in that cup. And neither did he in the 2018 World Cup, not responsible for any of their 5 goals. He was a starter there for games 1 and 2, but actually lost his starting position there. And for Euro 2020, he was a starter, and there he finally managed to score some goals in the tournament, scored 3 of their 8 goals in that tournament. And yeah, came off looking a little better. I got to say, he hadn't made a strong impression on me as a striker. I mean, even despite his 3 goals in Euro 2020, hasn't really struck me as the kind of striker, the star striker that they need. He missed a penalty actually in World Cup qualifying, and that led to a draw with Northern Ireland. But anyway, likely to reach the Cup, Haris Seferovic. And we'll talk about who the likely starter is between him and Brolo. Probably, though, not Gavranovic. Mario Gavranovic, despite being a likely candidate, doesn't seem like a starter to me. So he started only 2 of their 13 games since the 2021 Euro Cup, but he was subbed in 4 and on the bench for 2, and actually injured for 2 matches there. So I think he may have not been called up for a couple of games there. Gavranovic has been with Switzerland since 2011 and has 41 caps and 15 goals. He's 33 years old and plays for Kayserispor in Turkey since 2021. He's really been around a couple of clubs in Croatia and in Germany, moving over to Germany in 2010 from Iverdon Sport, which was the club he was with in Switzerland before he left. So he was on the squad for the 2014 World Cup, but didn't see any action, and then wasn't selected for the 2016 Euro Cup. For the 2018 World Cup, he was just a substitute there, didn't get any of their goals, and was a substitute in the 2020 Euro Cup too. But he did score a goal there, actually a crucial late equalizing goal in game 4 against France, which they went on to win on penalties. So Mario Gavranovic, a likely candidate to make the squad at least. And finally, we have Noah Okafor. So he earned his first cap back in 2019, actually, in a substitute appearance, but then was off the team for 2.5 years and returned in November 2021 to start 4 of their 8 remaining games, as well as subbing in for 3 and being on the bench for 1. So once he came back, he was always selected. Noah Okafor has been with Switzerland then since 2019, but just 8 caps and 2 goals. Just 22 years old, so good injection of youth there. And he plays for Red Bull Salzburg in Austria. They're in the Champions League this year, and he moved to Red Bull Salzburg from Basel in Switzerland, where he also finished out his youth career. He was with them for quite a while, actually. Okay, so Noah Okafor, a likely candidate, and we have Cedric Itten. Cedric Itten returned after a 12-month absence in October 2021 and didn't start any of their remaining 10 games, but he was subbed in for 3 and on the bench for 1. So he's been with Switzerland since 2019 and has 4 caps, but 3 goals in those 4 caps. So has made the most of his time on the field there. He is 26 years old, and Cedric Itten is currently with Young Boys in Switzerland, returning to Switzerland from being abroad with some teams, Rangers in Scotland, and he was loaned to Greuther Fürth in Germany there. And he was in Switzerland until 2020, so actually just went abroad for a short time there. He wasn't selected for the 2020 Euro Cup, and that was something of a surprise because he had been their top scorer in qualifying. In for this World Cup, he's only a possible candidate, but I think one of the possible candidates. Oh no, I'm mixing him up with someone else. I was going to say one of the possible candidates who has a bit of a better chance, but I pulled back on that comment. Next, we have Andy Zaghiri. He has started none of their games since the 2021 Euro, but he was subbed in for 7 games. However, he wasn't selected for any of the last 4 matches. So Andy Zaghiri has been with Switzerland since 2021 and has 7 caps, all substitute appearances, and is 23 years old. He's on the roster of Brighton in England since 2020, but actually has been loaned out. So he's with Basel in Switzerland now, and was also loaned to Augsburg in Germany. His main club was Lausanne Sport, where he spent the first 5 years of his senior career. Okay, and Zeki Amdouni is our last possible candidate. He just made his first and only appearance on the bench in June 2022. So again, a bit hard to tell with players who come in right at the end there. Zeki Amdouni is 22 years old, doesn't have any caps then, and is with Lausanne Sport in Switzerland, although he has been loaned to Basel in Switzerland in 2022. Finally, we have Dan Ndoye, and he is a possible but unlikely candidate. He got his first appearance on the bench in September 2021 and didn't start any of the remaining 12 games. Oh, yes. Okay. Just a bench player there because he was most of the time with the under 21 team. So just one appearance on the bench. I have him as having 1 cap, so I'm not sure where I got that from. But he is 22 years old and plays for Basel in Switzerland. He was actually with Nice in France from 2020 to 2022. So another player that we may see more of in the future. All right, well, that brings us to the end of forward. So we'll just finish by summarizing the position. So in the Euro Cup, it was actually a 2-man forward formation, and that was Seferovic and Embolo. And then in the last game of the Cup, it was just a single forward, and Seferovic played that role. He also played the first games of World Cup qualifying, but then he got injured and was out for I think 6 or 8 games there. And Embolo became the lone forward halfway through World Cup qualifying then. And we did see appearances from Gavranovic and Okafor in each of the last 2 games. Embolo and Gavranovic played in the friendlies, and then Seferovic came back from his injuries for 2 of the Nations League games, but otherwise Embolo played as a forward, and in one of those Nations League games, it was a 2-man forward line, so he was joined by Okafor. So a bit of a rotation. It looks like Seferovic was the first choice, but his injury kind of muddied the waters a little bit there. So we do have Embolo and Okafor, not so much Gavranovic, though, as starting forward. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the player-by-player section. So we're going to move on to a discussion of the squad. And at the top of the podcast, we started with our kind of takeaways from the podcasts that we've done on Switzerland so far. And those were team podcasts. So our first couple of comments were focused more on the team. And I talked about them above, so I'll just kind of remind here. So we noted that they had been fairly fortunate in a lot of their groupings over the years in Euro Cups and in World Cups, but especially in the last 15 or so years. And but we did say, in fairness, that they are starting to challenge top teams, whereas before they were pretty consistent against middling teams, but tended to lose when it came to meeting a top team. And it had been middling teams that they'd met in their groupings, which gave them a bit of an advantage. But now we see them challenging top teams a little bit more. In terms of player notes based on players, we can say they have really too many central players, especially central midfielders, and not enough wide players. So again, particularly true in the midfield. And it's hard to say whether the formation dictates the players or the players that they have dictate the formation. We do see that they don't have a lot of players coded as outside midfielders. And the long and short of this is that it seems to force them into formations that play fairly centrally. So not a lot of wing play by Switzerland. But we'll have to see. I'm not particularly confident in saying that because I'm not familiar enough with their play. But I will be keeping an eye out for it in this World Cup. But certainly in terms of formation, they look fairly central. And finally, we have a very tight squad. We're going to see they don't have a lot of players on the slate kind of coming in and out, but rather stick with a fairly small group. And that group, especially the starters, have been playing together for a long time. So I'm expecting a fairly cohesive squad. I actually think this is the reason why they have been challenging some of the top teams recently. Maybe they don't have the star talent of some of the other big teams in Europe, but they have a cohesion that some of the small teams like Wales have, where the players have been playing together for a long time and basically add up to more than the sum of their parts. So another issue is they don't have a lot of new blood coming in. So they may require some renewal in the years after the Cup. However, this tight squad of players is not that old. I would say late 20s or early 30s. So probably have a few years left in them, maybe 1 or 2 tournaments for a lot of these players. Anyway, a very cohesive squad there. And let's move on to talk about their club affiliation. So as I said, kind of lacking in big star power. They do have Manuel Akanji with a big club in Manchester City, but he's not really a starter on that club. So maybe we'll see more of him playing for Man United in the upcoming months and years. We also have Gregor Kobel for Borussia Dortmund, and I believe he's a starting keeper with them. I thought, and Philip Kohn, the starting keeper also, I think, for Red Bull Salzburg. So those two are backup keepers. So the starting keeper, Jan Sommer, plays for a slightly lesser club in Borussia Mönchengladbach. And there are a few of their players playing for slightly lesser clubs in Germany. So Borussia Mönchengladbach and Eintracht Frankfurt. I would say about a third of the squad is plying their trade in Switzerland. And again, the biggest teams there are probably Young Basel, probably the biggest team there, and Young Boys, but not all of them play for the biggest teams. There are a couple with some of the smaller teams in Switzerland, like Lugano and St. Gallen, and that. And otherwise, I would say it's kind of second to even third tier teams like Lorient and Montpellier in France, Newcastle and Nottingham Forest in England, and Bologna and Torino in France. We also have Bril and Bolo playing for Monaco. Sorry, Monaco in the French league, and then two players playing for Red Bull Salzburg who are in the Champions League this year. Okay, so that's an overview of their club affiliations. Let's move on to talk about some stats for the club. Some stats. So if you've been listening to other podcasts, you know I'm working on some statistics, and they're pretty rough, but hopefully I'll develop them over time. But one of the stats I have is the total number of candidates on the plate for the teams. And on the graphic here, I have total players called up since 2020, but it should be since 2021. So that kind of gives us an idea of how many players they're dealing with. At the upper end, we have teams like Ecuador, USA, and Mexico, who have around 65 players on their plate. And at the lower end, we have teams like Belgium and Denmark and Argentina, surprisingly, and Wales, who have fewer numbers, around 45. So Switzerland is very low here, kind of confirming the tight squad note that I had above. 43 for Switzerland. So that's, a fairly small number to be dealing with. They may have to, as I said, bring in more players after the Cup and stuff, but it seems to be enough, except for outside midfielders. Maybe they need to add. I wouldn't be surprised if they try out a couple. Well, I might be a bit surprised, because I think that they're just accepting it and kind of going with the more central formation, like the 4-2-3-1 that they favor. Okay, in terms of total players under consideration then, I should just finish with the total number of candidates there. So 43 for Switzerland, and the average is 49.5. So quite a few less candidates on the table than most teams. In terms of candidates kind of under consideration, current consideration, we look at the definite, likely, and possible candidates. So they're the ones really who have been playing recently, and that's 35 for Switzerland, and the average is 33. So actually a bit more than most. We did see a number of possible candidates there. So it seems to be like the players they use fairly regularly, and that's supported by the last one, the total players in the definite and likely category. And surprisingly, they are the highest of all teams with 25. So they've pretty much decided on their World Cup squad here, because they only bring 26 to the Cup. So if they use all of their players in the definite and likely category, they would only have to add one from the possible category. Of course, there may be a couple of players who are injured, a couple of players in good form at the very end, that may change that. But basically, I think this is going to be true, where there won't be any big surprises with Switzerland. We'll see almost all of the definite and likely candidates, and maybe 2 or 3 unexpected candidates. We'll move on to talk about their age, average age. Well, I've been saying 25 to 27 is average. Normally, I think of 27 as being slightly older. But in this World Cup, so far, judging by my stats, 27 is close to average. The average is 26.8. So compared to most teams, no, not a particularly old squad. So as I say, this tight and cohesive squad does seem to have a few years left in its legs. And if we look specifically, their oldest player is 33 years old. So most teams have a couple of players who are older than that. They do have a number of players who are over 30, though. So it's 11 players who are 30 or older. But as we saw, not much older than 30. So early 30s, a good age actually for a balance of experience and still young enough to play. At the other end, they don't have a lot of players who are very young either, just 3 players who are 22 or younger. The biggest of them would be Noah Okafor. The others have kind of barely made their way into the squad, and that's kind of true of all the players who are 24 or younger, apart from Ruben Vargas and Noah Okafor. So age not an issue. I think beginning to see 27 as kind of a good age for a balance of experience and freshness. The average number of caps is 33.1. So actually that is quite a bit below other teams. So they do kind of, no, sorry, it's not, it's above. 29.6 is the average. So again, good experience with the squad, and more experience than the average squad. In terms of goals, they have 128 goals across all of those players. That would be their definite, likely, impossible players. The statistics doesn't mean much in itself until we talk about this statistic, the goals per player. And so I've calculated this into a percentage, and it's 12.1%. So that is a bit low because the average is 13.5%. And the very lowest there is 11.2%. Sorry, just 11.0%. Japan and South Korea at 11.6. Those are teams that are notable for kind of having difficulty scoring. So a bit of a problem, I would say, for Switzerland, needing a few more goals. I'll just kind of finish this by going over the percentages for some of the players. So I said in the podcast that they don't really have a star striker. Actually, Breen Mbolo's percentage is a little low. He is at 19%, which is not great for a forward. 11 goals in 58 games. Hans Seferovic, the other forward, has a pretty good ratio at 28.4. Not outstanding, but 25 goals in 88 games. As I said, he's never really struck me that much in tournaments. So I would still argue they don't really have a star striker. Actually, Cedric Itim with 4 goals in 7 games is 57%, but we usually don't count. We usually don't look at it unless it's under 20 games because, who was the player with 3 goals in 4 games that we looked at during players? I can't find him here, but he's not going to keep up a 75% ratio like that. So again, Steven Zuber is also 19%, which is not bad for a right attacking midfielder. And Xherdan Shaqiri is actually probably their main scorer with 26 goals in 108 games. So he's at 24%, which is quite good for a midfielder. But, a star striker is usually, it should be around 30%, I would say. And they do get kind of goals from all over the field, but I maintain that they're not a high scoring team and could benefit from finding a star striker or someone to put the ball in the goal more reliably. Okay, let's move on to players and issues to watch. So actually not a lot with Switzerland. These are kind of minor quibbles. So in central defense, is it unsettled or is it a rotation? We saw actually that it was quite settled in the early part of the period in the Cup with Akanji and Elvedi and Schär kind of rotating. But then we saw central midfielder Frey come into the fray and Comert also a little bit. So by the end for the Nations League games, we kind of had those 5 players rotating, which seems a bit too confusing. However, we have seen that teams are kind of rotating players more than in the past when they had just two starters starting every game, and that may be what they're doing here. They certainly don't lack the personnel, but I wonder if it's a bit unsettled or whether that's a strategy. Also, in terms of the overall formation, I don't know why I put this in defense actually, but maybe because they started with a three-man defense for 4 games in the Euro Cup, and then went to a 4-man backline. Then they stuck with the 4-man backline. But in terms of the midfield and other formations, they were pretty reliably using a 4-2-1-3, and then in the Four Nations League games in June, tried out 2 formations besides a 4-4-2 and a 4-3-3. So that was a bit confusing, and I wonder if it's wise to kind of make a lot of changes when they don't have a lot of games before the Cup to get used to those changes. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in September here. In the central midfield, we did notice that they really have too many central midfielders. But then we saw it's those central midfielders who kind of play out wide, although they don't use a lot of wide players. So when it was a 2-man midfielder, it was shared by Freuler and Zacher, and then sometimes Zachariah coming in as the 3rd man, but more recently Idrissa Sow taking that role. So again here, a steady cast, but a bit of rotation, making us wonder again if that's kind of a strategic rotation or just indecision about who the real starters are. Again, these are kind of minor quibbles. Probably one of the more major quibbles is few wingers, which forces them to play more centrally. I've talked about that above. And not enough midfield candidates in general. In a lot of the positions, we only had 1 player there, so they could use a few more. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried a couple out in the upcoming games. But again, maybe kind of too late to introduce new players, so they'll probably just go with their more central players. And certainly they have enough to bring to the Cup. Just I wonder if there are injuries and stuff, whether they really have enough to back that up. Finally, in attack, following on to what I said above, more goals, please. I'll leave it at that. A little thin on scoring. Don't really have a star striker, but they seem to get by. Okay, let's move on and talk about new injured and notable absences. And I've actually decided to limit this to basically definite or likely players, unless there is a possible player who seems kind of significant, in other words, has been on the field, during our player-by-player discussion, for example. So actually, Switzerland don't have that many, but significantly, we have Yakin Murat, the manager. He is new to the team since 2021, so we'll look at the outgoing manager in the notable absences section. And the only other player who we have as a definite candidate, though not a starter, is Michel Aebischer. So a kind of a central midfielder he's coded at, and has only played a couple of games as a left or right defensive kind of midfielder. He is new to the squad. And up front, we have Noah Okafor, who we consider a likely candidate. He's worked his way into the squad, and he's just 22 years old. And finally, we have goalkeeper Philip Cohn, who is just a possible candidate, but yeah, and he might not make it to the Cup, but he does seem to be the starting keeper for Red Bull Salzburg, who will be playing in the Champions League. So I wonder if he'll kind of move up in the pecking order. Mind you, he has got pretty stiff competition in front of him there. And that's it. I mean, some of the possible players are new, but they haven't really broken into the squad in terms of a starting position. And once again, testament to how tight and cohesive the squad are. As I said, they've been playing together for quite a while, so not easy to break into that squad. These players will come through more when that squad starts to retire, I suppose. In terms of injuries, not a big problem for Switzerland. Gregor Kobel, the goalkeeper, who's the, I believe, the starting keeper for Borussia Dortmund there, is injured. He's out with a torn muscle fiber, and I'm not sure when that happened exactly, but he was out for a few September games with his club there. But he's expected to be back before the World Cup. So I don't think that's going to be a big problem, although torn muscle fiber doesn't sound too good. We also mentioned in the play-by-play podcast Matteo Botani, kind of a bench player who's just a possible candidate. And he was injured for the games in June 2022, but I see that he's back playing for his club over the summer. So not a problem there. All right, so all that's left here is the notable absences. So converse to Yakin Murat being the new manager, the outgoing manager Vladimir Petkovic managed them through the Euro 2016, World Cup 2018, and Euro 2020, where they passed the group stage every time, even beating France in the round of 16 of Euro 2020 to reach the quarterfinals. So was a good manager for them, but now has made way for Murat Yakin. We have Valon Behrami, who we introduced in the play-by-player, a central midfielder with 83 caps. He actually retired before the Euro, last appeared in the World Cup 2018. But we are going back a little bit here because there are some fans who follow the team kind of from World Cup to World Cup. So they may remember him from the 2018 World Cup. Stefan Lichtensteiner, the right back, who was with the team from 2006 to 19 and had 108 caps. He was the captain. He also wasn't around for the Euro 2020, but was the captain and starter in the 2018 World Cup and prior. Blerem Dusmaili, central midfielder who was a starter in the 2018 World Cup and 2016 Euro Cup. Also didn't make it to the Euro 2020, so just a player that some will remember from the World Cup. I was almost introducing this guy in the player-by-player podcast, Admir Mehmedi, and despite his 76 caps, never kind of really worked his way into the team, just the Euro 2016 where he was a starter. But he was around from 2011 to 21 and was kind of a substitute in the 2014 World Cup. He was injured for the 2018 Cup, but was also a substitute in Euro 2020. Just a familiar name, I guess. Johan Juru, 76 caps and was with the team from 2006 to 2018. Again, not necessarily a starter all the way, but he was in the 2014 World Cup and 2016 Euro Cup. And his last tournament was the 2018 World Cup. And finally, Joseph Durmich went off in search of an extra vowel for his name. He was actually never really integrated fully into the squad, was a starter in the 2014 World Cup and just a substitute in the 2018 World Cup, but was a player they kind of relied on for goals. And he did actually have a scoring percentage of over 33%. So they perhaps miss him in terms of goals, though he was never fully integrated into the squad. So all of those players listed in grey, meaning that they are retired, a darker grey, and players who have never played in a tournament listed in lighter grey. There, like the new ones that we introduced there. And this is only relevant for YouTube watchers, so I'll stop yammering on about it. And we're going to finish with the predicted starters. So we'll just run through the squad quickly again, and basically name the most of the major players and the ones who we think are going to start. So Vladimir Petkovic, the manager, is out. So I'll put him in red there, and in red. Highlights, yikes. And Murat Yakin is in. So we'll call Murat Yakin a starter because he's the one who will take them through the cup. In terms of goalkeepers, we have definite candidates Jan Sommer and Jonas Omlin, and likely candidate Gregor Kobel. And I'll mention Philip Cohn as a possible candidate because I wouldn't be shocked to see him move into make the squad. But anyway, Jan Sommer is the clear starter there, at least for the time being. I think the others will take over probably after the cup, I'm guessing. In terms of central defenders, we have kind of a rotation at the back there, and actually the most consistent starters have been Manuel Akanji and Nico Elvedi, although I do think it'll be a bit of a rotation, and I think Fabian Schär will get a couple of starts there, especially if they go deeper into the tournament. So that's where I stand on that one. The other candidate we have is Ire Komert as a definite candidate, actually, but not as a starter. He's been called up to the squad, but hasn't actually earned that many starts. As a left back, there's really no one other than Ricardo Rodriguez. And Ulises Garcia, who came back after a 4-year absence, is a likely candidate, but really hasn't earned any starts and is certainly not challenging Ricardo Rodriguez for the position. In fact, when Rodriguez is out, it's a right back who comes in to replace him. So Ulises Garcia a bit far from the starting lineup there. And those right backs are definite candidate Sylvain Widmer and possible candidates Kevin Mbabu and Jordan Latomba. I wouldn't be surprised if all three of them made it. And in fact, despite Mbabu being just a possible candidate, I think he missed a few of the last games. They have been rotating the position all the way since the Euro Cup. So I think that will continue and both of them will get starts. But I would nod Sylvain Widmer as a slightly more likely there. Defensive midfielders, we have quite a few. Possible candidate Denny Zakaria does see some field time. And we have definite central midfielders Remo Freuler, Granit Xhaka, and Djibril Sow, as well as likely candidate Fabian Frau. So I'm going to actually nominate all three of those central midfielders as starters. Because some of them will play kind of a left midfielder, right midfielder. Xhaka may be a bit more an advanced role. I think they like to have them on the field. And Djibril Sow is a bit versatile, sometimes even playing in positions outside of the centre midfield there. So, yes, that's that. And defensive midfielders, they don't really use the position, nor do they use the position of left winger that much, although Ruben Vargas does play as a left winger or a left attacking midfielder. So I'm going to use my hedging color and say that Ruben Vargas will get some starts But a bit of a rotation there with Steven Zuber. I think Steven Zuber, the left attacking midfielder, is more likely than Vargas to be a starter. But I'll kind of put those two in a rotation because I think both of them will get starts. Not so much on the right side, where I think Renato Stefan is a starter, and there's not a real challenge to his position unless it comes from one of the forwards, actually. So Renato Stefan, a definite candidate who I think will make it. Attacking midfielders, we have Xherdan Shaqiri as a likely starter, and I really only put him down to likely because, well, he didn't start all the games, but he's also with Chicago Fire in the USA, and I just feel like the Europeans are a bit Eurocentric that way, and they lose respect for players when they go to play abroad in other continents. So I hope that doesn't happen, and maybe Shaqiri will blast through that. I do see him as a starter here because he's one of their top scorers. So they'll find room for him probably as a central attacking midfielder. Really, no other strong candidates in that position, just players who have been on the bench. As forwards go, we have Breel Embolo as a definite, and Haris Seferovic, Mario Gavranovic, and Noah Okafor as likely. And what will I say here? I'd say Seferovic, he got injured for a while, so he kind of dropped off. He was the starter before that, but I don't know if he's going to come back into a starting position. So without getting into too much discussion, I'm gonna hedge and nominate them all as sometimes starters. Actually, not Gavranovic. I think Okafor will be ahead of Grafanovic in the starting order. So I think, but I really do think all of them will get some starts. And if I had to nominate a starter, I'd probably go with Seferovic there. All right, well, that brings us to the end of the podcast. So keep in mind that we'll be doing an update as soon as new information comes out, and that will probably be in early November when the teams will be publishing squad lists. So I won't repeat our address. I'll just say check the show notes if you want to. All the information you need, we've been improving that, and there are links to our websites and previous podcast series. Thanks for listening, and I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.